What we want to do is to, first of all, start with an exhortation, then look at exposition, look at some of Daniel's prophecies and expound one of the prophecies there, and then look at the events of last year and this year to try and tie in with the events that are happening around the world with the things that we have read in the prophets. To see that these things are indeed living, that we are in the time of the end, and we are most privileged to be able to see the Word of God coming to pass in our own generation, and then a final exhortation. So some words from Amos. God has said that he has revealed his word, his secrets, unto his servants the prophets. And in their day and generation, those prophets wrote down the things that they heard from their God. And we have that book in our hands. The prophets wrote it down, and we are privileged to be able to read it. But sadly, as far as prophecy is concerned, to many people, because of the many divisions that we have in our understanding, it is a closed book. And that's very sad, because of all the times we should be so thrilled to see the Word of God coming to pass before our eyes. A fortnight ago, I was speaking at Shirley, and I think the young brother is here, and I hope he won't mind me saying this, because he had no problem at all, but he was interested to know what my answer would be to those who pose the statement that those who expound prophecy keep on changing their ideas. Well, my first word was yes. As far as the finer details are concerned, but no, as far as the broad outline is concerned. What I want us to see is that as we get closer and closer to the Master's coming, then we can see more and more clearly the fulfilment of these prophecies. Those living in bygone times, Brother Thomas, Brother Roberts, my father, they were able to see so much, but the finer detail they couldn't quite relate, because we hadn't moved to that time phase. But the general outline, what they were looking for, hasn't changed at all. We can fine-tune our ideas. But the broad picture that's been looked at by our community for over 150 years still stands. It's true that the political world that Brother Thomas saw was quite different to our own. The vast Hungarian, Austrian Empire, the dying remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, and the huge expanse of Russia over here, and no Germany, we've got Prussia, 2 parts of Prussia there, divided Italy with papal states going down there. That was the world that he looked out upon. But he saw, through his understanding of prophecy, the sure fulfilment of these things. And I want us to go to the book Help Us Israel. It was written in 1849, so over 150 years ago. And I want to go to the third section, which was his prophetic section, and just look at the heading of chapter 5. Now, you won't be able to read that, so the first part there, this chapter is about the Eastern question in the time of the end. And look at some of the things that he was writing about over 150 years ago. It is impossible that the Holy Land be forever subject to the Gentiles. That was his opening statement. Remember, this was written a long, long time before the Jews could go back. Or this part here. Click again. The autocrat of Russia, the king of the north at the time of the end. Or again, this one here. Daniel's king of the north of the time of the end, and Gog of the latter days, the same. Or this one here. The Gog of Ezekiel proved to be the emperor of Germany and autocrat of all the Russias. And his final section is Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and its young lions, identified as the British power. Now, here we are 155 years later. Now, we don't have to deal with Israel returning to their land. That is history. That has happened. But as I say, he was writing that from the viewpoint of the land under Muslim domination, under Turkish power. He could see that the Turks had to be driven out. The river Euphrates had to be dried up in order for the Jews to go back. So we don't have to talk about that. That's history. We look back on that. But things like the autocrat of Russia equals the emperor of Germany and the king of the north, and Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and its young lions identified as the British power, are things that we can talk about, because these are things which haven't changed. Now, that phrase of the autocrat of all the Russias, I will freely confess that as a young man, reading through Eureka at my father's classes, whenever we came across this phrase, the autocrat of all the Russias, I used to smile to myself at, well, an old-fashioned phrase, how outdated Brother Thomas was. But you see, as you get older, you get wise. And Brother John Ramsden came back a few years ago from Russia with a calendar. And there they talked about the autocrats of Russia as referring to the Tsars. It's the word that they still use, of the Tsars, the autocrat of all the Russias. Autocrat means absolute ruler. But here we go to the Daily Telegraph, December the 8th, 2003, Putin to assume the power of a Tsar. Or this cartoon in the Times just a fortnight ago. You might not be able to read it up there. The Tsar is in the house. There is Putin sitting there. Too authoritative. How dare you, you miserable serf, talking about Colin Powell of America. And here we have this week, a stern-looking Vladimir Putin stunned Russia on Tuesday, February the 24th, last Tuesday, less than 3 weeks before he's due to stand for re-election as president, by announcing that he has sacked the government. So, an autocrat, yes, history repeats itself. We have to wait, and the cycle of time goes round. And we have certainly in Mr. Putin an authoritative person. I believe too that the Tsar himself will be reinstated. He's a young man, he's about 22 now, and he has got German origins. And so what Brother Thomas was talking about, the Emperor of Germany and the autocrat of the Russias being the same person, may very well soon be revealed as being exactly spot on. But the crown, which was used to crown the Tsars, has been remade. A copy has been made and presented to Putin. The old imperial throne room has been lovingly restored, many millions spent on restoring it. And there's a cartoon in the Newsweek of Putin. And the Constantine Palace has been restored as part of the celebrations last year of the 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg. So, all the settings are there for an autocrat of all the Russias to appear. So, have we changed? Have we changed our viewpoint? And broadly, the answer is no. We're still looking for the same things. The Word of God is sufficiently clear that we can understand what God's plan and purpose is. We might not see all the details, but he has given it that we might learn, that we might look, that we might understand. And this encourages us. God is unchangeable. He wrote centuries, millennia ago, of things which are coming to pass now. And so that quotation again, the Lord God has revealed his secrets to those who are wont to know, his servants the prophets. If we read his servants the prophets, then we will know the mind of God. And what is so wonderful, brothers and sisters, and young people, and friends especially, is that the same angelic hands which work so hard behind the scenes to ensure that the nations move according to God's predetermined plan, those same angelic hands are busy in our lives. God has a plan and a purpose for each one of us, and he's shaping our lives and directing our lives along that pathway which he has preordained. God cares for his servants. And so we're reading, won't we, in the Psalms, "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endureth forever. Who can utter the mighty acts of God, the Lord? Who can show forth all his praise?" So let's have a look at an exposition. Those who've read Milestones this year know that I've taken a slightly different tack. and have based it around the theme of the King of the North and the King of the South, which we illustrated on the front cover, with the leaders of Germany and France and Russia, depicting those who will form the King of the North at the top there, and those who form part of the King of the South, Bush and Blair, on down the bottom here. And the interesting conflict last year, a pushing by the King of the South of the King of the North into Iraq, depicted in the middle here, and the statue of Saddam Hussein, falling, depicting his overthrow. But we come back to these things. Now, the background that we want to just very briefly look at is that depicted in Daniel in his 8th chapter. What is revealed in that chapter is a division of the empire under the Greeks into first a fourfold and then basically into a twofold division, which from the 3rd to the 1st century BC was the situation when this was all the Greek Empire, but General Ptolemy and General Seleucus had their empires and their successors succeeded them, and piggy in the middle was Israel in the middle here. And although they were both Greeks, they were at loggerheads with each other, and Israel experienced the tramp of the enemy's boot on many occasions. Those in the north especially were very opposed to the Jews and the things of Israel. And the situation that was depicted in the prophecies there is our pattern that enables us to see the picture at the time of the end. And briefly in chapter 8, if we just turn to Daniel chapter 8, the vision there is very clear, it is explained, so it's not a difficult chapter to understand, but a vision of a ram with 2 horns, a smaller horn and a higher horn representing the Medes, and the Persian Empire was the dominant one, the taller one, which had a big empire. It tells us in verse 4 of the pushing northward and westward and northward and southward, a big empire that the Persians had, much bigger than the Babylonian Empire. And then in verse 5 he sees a he-goat coming from the west. This is Greece, the power of Greece, and it had a notable horn between its eyes. In it comes and it strikes the ram in verse 6, and it breaks him in verse 7. And in verse 8 it describes how that notable horn was broken and 4 ones should come up. So in the depiction of it, that notable horn was Alexander the Great, an incredible military leader, a very young, tender age, died before he was 33, conquered right up from Greece, right across the Middle East, right up to India. But at the nearly 33, that horn was broken. And here's a picture of Alexander on his horse riding out to conquer. Now, in doing a bit of background reading of this, I was most intrigued to see this coin, which depicted Alexander wearing a simple headband. And if you see, there is a ram's horn on that headband. In fact, I've just cut it out there. So it's a headband goes around his head, a horn on both sides. Now, I can't prove it, but I think that he wore this headband to signify his conquest of Persia, the ram. God uses symbols in prophecy which very often are related to historical facts, so that when we come to the book of Revelation, a woman riding the beast, you can see many depictions of Europa riding the bull. I think it was here. Here was Alexander the Great, having conquered Greece, having conquered the Persian Empire, was celebrating. But as I say, at the tender age of 32 3/4 or so, he died, and eventually, after a lot of wrangling, his 4 generals took over, and his kingdom was divided among the 4 generals. The scripture's only concerned with 2 horns, what later becomes the King of the North and the King of the South, because it was those 2 horns which affected the nation of Israel. The other two horns over in Greece had no influence upon the affairs of Israel. And out of one of those horns came a little horn, which was the military might of Rome. Rome came to the assistance, in inverted commas, and took over the Greek Empire. It didn't spring out of the head, it wasn't Grecian, but it did spring out of one of the horns. A remarkable truth in the depiction of these symbols here. So we paint that picture because what we are looking for, because when we come to Daniel chapter 11, it clearly states that at the time of the end there shall be a king of the north and a king of the south. And so we're looking for a power to occupy this territory here, and a power opposing it down in the south, a king of the north and a king of the south power. Now, Daniel earlier had revealed to King Nebuchadnezzar the dream that he had seen of the image, and what is depicted in the image is exactly the same things as was depicted later on in the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7. And what is remarkable is the time it has taken for this image to be built. It started 2.5 millennia ago, and it yet hasn't been completed. It doesn't stand upon its feet yet, but we're rapidly approaching that time when this image will stand upon its feet. And it will be an amalgam of nations who occupy the territories of the old gold and the silver and the brass and the iron and clay there. The countries of Europe and Russia united together, and that image will stand upon its feet, and it is to come down into the Middle East and down into Israel, to conquer Israel, to take Jerusalem captive, come down into Egypt, and stand in defiance of the God of Israel. And the image will stand. And so when we come to Ezekiel talking of the same things, put some names to that confederacy of nations. It talks in language, once we interpret the symbols of where the countries are, it's talking of Russia and Europe and Persia and Libya and Ethiopia, countries banding together to be a king of the north, a power coming down against Israel, against the things of Israel, against the things of God's people. But it's Ezekiel that also tells us that there is a power opposed to this invasion. There is a king of the south. There is a Sheba, a Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish with the young lions thereof, who we depict thus. And so there is a coming contest between the king of the north powers, who will come down and occupy the former territories, and the king of the south powers. We'll deal with the king of the south first of all, because this is so fascinating and perhaps not quite so well known as the king of the north. We're more acquainted with what's happening in Europe, but we shall deal with that in a moment. So if we just turn on to Ezekiel, or turn back, if we want to find Ezekiel, we'll go the wrong way. Ezekiel chapter 38 depicts the various countries which make up this confederacy. Gog in verse 2 and all the nations with him are depicted in the first 6 verses, and describes how they're going to come against Israel at a time when they've come back, languages we well know, at a time when they are at peace, and this is the situation that we're looking for to unfold, and we believe that the steps that Bush and Blair took last year will lead to this period of peace and stability for Israel. But we just want to pick up verse 13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to gather away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? So there is a grouping of nations who are opposed to this action on the part of Gog. The Revised Version just subtly translates it as the merchants of Tarshish and all their young lions, to show that the young lions are associated with the merchants of Tarshish. Now, if we just go back a few chapters to chapter 27, a wonderful chapter in Ezekiel depicting the city of Tyre on the Mediterranean coast, just north of Israel, and all the many nations that traded with Tyre. And they're all listed in this wonderful chapter. And when we come to verse 15, we read there, of the men of Dedan were thy merchants, many isles were the merchandise of thy hand. They brought thee for a present horns or tusks of ivory and ebony. Other translators don't change it very much, but the merchants of Dedan, many isles were the merchandise of thine hand. In other words, these Dedanites were trading people. They were merchant people who had ships, and they visited many isles, bringing their wares, taking it across, selling it in Tyre. And these Dedanites were related to Cush. Go back to Genesis chapter 10, don't turn to it. Genesis chapter 10 gives us the division of the nations, and we read there of Sheba and Dedan, the grandsons of Cush. We also just read on that Cush begat Nimrod. Now, Nimrod's territory was in modern-day Iraq. So we associate this Sheba and Dedan with that kind of territory. Don't worry about Sheba just for a moment, but the Dedan, we put down the coastline there. That seems to be the territory of the Dedan in Ezekiel's day. Trading, shipping, going out to India and places like that, but down the coastline there. But if we just look further on, if we're still in Ezekiel chapter 27, we also find in verse 20 a Dedan, and we will take it this is a different Dedan, because in fact there were two Dedans, two Shebas and Dedans, if not three. And this Dedan, was thy merchant in precious clothes for chariots. Now, this Dedan is associated with Eden. If we just go back, and I'm sorry I wasn't here in the first talk, I was down in the other hall, so this might have been touched on, I don't know. But Ezekiel 25 links Dedan with Teman. I will stretch out mine hand upon Edom, will cut off man and beast from it, and I will make it desolate from Teman, and they of Dedan shall fall by the sword, or they shall fall by the sword unto Dedan, it matters not. But it shows that Dedan must be near to Teman. So Teman is down in the south there, so this Dedan we associate with southern Jordan and northern Saudi Arabia, that kind of part there. And that Dedan was descended, he was the grandson, the Sheba and Dedan were the grandsons of Abraham, so were Semitic. Now, as far as the Shebas were concerned, it does appear, from what I can unravel, that the two Shebas, the Cushite Sheba and the Semitic Sheba, seem to have mingled down in the south there and are indistinguishable. So it matters not, but for our purpose, Sheba is down in the south in Yemen, but more interestingly, not only just on the Arabian Peninsula side, but over into Ethiopia and Djibouti and Eritrea of today. That was the empire from which the Queen of Sheba came. So when we read of Sheba, Dedan, we are looking at countries skirting around the Arabian Peninsula. And associated with Sheba and Dedan in their territory seem to be merchants of Tarshish. Now, we're not going to spend much time with this because this is a subject which has been expounded since Brother Thomas's day. That's what that chapter was about, the merchants of Tarshish identifying with Britain. And I see no reason to change that. Britain is a premier, a maritime country. 2/3 of the world's open market cargo is handled by London. It doesn't physically come to London, but the banking, the insurance, the money exchanges, the forward marketing, all handled in London. 2/3. Over 2 billion foreign exchange brought in by Britain's merchant fleet. And it's estimated that by beneficial ownership rather than flag of convenience, if we trace back and find who actually owns the ship, a fifth or a quarter of the world's merchant shipping is British owned. And London promotes itself as the world's premier maritime centre. But what's so fascinating is that associated with these merchants of Tarshish are all the young lions thereof, or Revised Version, and all their young lions. The merchants of Tarshish and all their young lions. And so we see in the symbol that the merchants of Tarshish is like an old lion who has young lions working with them. Britain we see as the old lion, and countries like America and Canada, Australia, India as being the young lions. And it's so incredible how at this particular time in history these countries are working together. America and Australia and India have been working in Iraq solely, or not just solely, no, but have been working there very much with Israel in mind. The leaders of all these nations see that Israel has a right to exist in peace. And their efforts in Iraq were in order to move forward that peace process. And I challenge anyone to find any other similarity other than we have here as a depiction of Britain and her allies. A family of nations who acknowledge a mother country, who are independent of her, they're not cubs, they're young lions, they're independent of her, but they will work together. And they're friendly to Israel. How remarkable that the angels have put into power a Bush and a Blair and a Howard in Australia, and a ruler in India whose name escapes me, but they are all friendly with Israel at this particular time of world history. Just at the right time, we have this grouping of nations, and as we shall see, they are active in that territory of Sheba and Dedan. Those are the British bases, ignoring totally anything that's happening in Iraq. There are obviously many British bases in Iraq, but this is totally ignoring anything there. These are established bases, and bases which have been established in the past year to strengthen the British standing in the area. The main base in Cyprus, Turkey, in Jordan, and of course Kuwait and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Oman. These are the British bases here, and one in Saudi. The American ones are more numerous. The P stands for pre-positioning, where America has put weaponry already in, so it doesn't have to be flown in, transported in from Europe or from America. If we just put the two together, we see a remarkable, in the area of Dedan and Sheba and the other Dedan up there, a remarkable coexistence of nations from the four corners of the earth drawn into this area of Sheba and Dedan. And fascinatingly, the Debka web account, website which I go into, which is an Israeli intelligence source, spoke at the beginning of February of America's blueprint, as it were, that what Bush is working to is to ring this area, starting with Cyprus and Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen, Sudan, Libya, and across there, a ring of influence. And this map extends downwards into Eritrea and Djibouti and Ethiopia and down here. This is what he is working towards. And you see how firmly it puts Britain and America and her allies into this area, and how vitally important the Suez Canal is. So, though at the moment we see Britain and America economically very much involved with Egypt, don't be surprised if we don't see Britain once again in Egypt defending her passageway through there to all the bases in this area. If you want an insight into President Bush's mind and the way he thinks about the Bible and Israel, get this book from your library, or if you've got £10, buy it, it's not that expensive. But David Frum, who is a Jew, so a very interesting viewpoint, the Daily Telegraph asked him to cover the visit of President Bush when he came in November time. And this is what he wrote. These are his headlines, not my headlines. And see how a man of the world can see what the Bible was talking about 2,500 years ago. It was headed, the article was headed, the Anglo-Australian-American Alliance. And this is what he said: the British power is not merely a function of the men and money that the British governments have chosen to invest in their armed forces. Much more, British power is a tribute to Britain's democratic cohesion in a time of increasing ethnic strife, to Britain's proud national identity in a world governed by post-colonial guilt, and to Britain's sense of moral responsibility in a Europe too often willing to sacrifice every principle to avoid risk and trouble. What has to be understood by everyone, British and American, is that, along with Australia, Britain has been and will continue to be America's indispensable ally, not because its Prime Minister is weak, but because the British nation remains so strong. Together, the Anglo-Australian-American Alliance can guarantee not only the peace of the world, but also liberty and human rights. No other three nations, no 163 other nations can say the same. Isn't this remarkable, that what Ezekiel talked about, Sheba, Dedan, merchants of Tarshish, young lions in that area, this is what he is seeing. These nations, these lion nations, working with the old lion in order to establish peace, which we know has got to come for Israel to dwell on the mountains in peace. And Israel doesn't have a lot of friends, and most of those friends are English-speaking nations or countries that Britain has had a tremendous influence on. America founding from Britain, India, great influences there, Australia likewise. Turkey is the odd man out, Jordan again very strongly influenced by Britain. But these are Israel's friends, and very largely they are cooperating together to try to help Israel dwell at peace. And Bush himself, not Bush, Blair just a month ago made this statement: as you know, I have been critical of certain aspects of Israeli policy, but I do honestly believe it is impossible to get this peace process restarted unless there is a credible security plan that allows people to believe genuinely that every attempt is being made to stop the support of terrorism, the flow of terrorists into either the Palestinian Authority territory or into Israel, and to give a clear message that terrorism is the enemy of progress for the Palestinian people, he said. It is so obvious, he added. And so he, along with Bush and along with Howard, are working to establish peace in Israel. And I just want to trace, because it's not very well known amongst us, the incredible role of Australia in all this. There is Australia, the other side of the world. And yet she is drawn to the Middle East to help the Jewish people. This is a well-known picture. You won't be able to see any detail, but there's Allenby entering into Jerusalem in 1917, towards the end of the First World War. Now, very largely, Britain being able to march Allenby into Jerusalem was because of the help given by the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. In fact, it was the Australian cavalry charge which took Beersheba in an incredible battle that really was the turning point in driving the Turks out of the land of what today we call the land of Israel. And so it was Australian troops that played a key role in helping push back the Turks back to their land. So there we are, 1917, and there is Australia involved in the things of Israel. In the Second World War, the German troops were coming down through Syria. And many Jews had gone back, and in northern Israel there were many Jewish settlements. And they were under a great threat of the German invasion. It was the Australian troops that held the line and kept back that German advance until eventually the Germans were destroyed and the Jews were saved. So in the Second World War, there was Australia from half a world away, working to help Israel, coming to the aid of Israel. And it has only just been revealed, we know that Australia played a big role in patrolling with her ships the Persian Gulf, and played a very important role there. But what has only just come to light last month was the role of the Australian SAS. They went in about 3 days before the Gulf War started, and during those 3 days and the subsequent few days, they took out every one of Saddam's Scud missile sites. And remember, it was 11 years before, in the first Gulf War, it was those Scud sites that sent the rockets to attack Israel. So the Australian SAS went in and took out all those sites, and they didn't lose a man. But how truly remarkable, here a country, half a continent away, acting in Iraq to protect Israel. And this was from the Jerusalem Post before that role was known. We knew about the other role of Australia helping patrol the Gulf. But see the comment here. Despite the distances involved and the apparent lack of overlapping interests, there seems to be a sort of affinity between Australia and Israel, an almost overlapping destiny. Well, we know that's the hand of the angels. Had caused John Howard on the third attempt, his last attempt to get in, very pro-Israel. I say he was in New York at the time of the Twin Towers. He stood with President Bush and saw the devastation that took place. And he was determined with Bush that terrorism would be conquered. Now, whether they succeed, it matters not. God uses these men. He raises them up. And here we are, this affinity, because Australia is one of those young lions that is working to defend the interests of Israel. And last month, the Foreign Secretary of Australia was in Israel, and again, this comment, in an era of anti-American and anti-Israel political correctness, Australia has become the leader of a counter-revelation based on morality and common sense. The policies adopted and implemented by Prime Minister John Howard and Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, who is in Israel on an official visit, are characterised by a combination of backbone, courage and principle. For all these reasons, as well as steadily increasing trade with Israel and a firm rejection of anti-Semitism, old and new, Alexander Downer deserves a very warm welcome in Jerusalem. It's truly remarkable how the word of God is coming to pass. And India, we haven't much time, the clock is going round very fast. But India has very close ties, of course, with Britain, but has also very close ties with the United States and very close ties with Israel. The government that is in power now is very friendly with Israel. And in fact, I just drew this down last night from the United News of India. India's military ties with the US Central Command are improving. Now, the US Central Command is the military that has oversight, as it were, of the Middle East. And what India is doing, she used to work with the Pacific Arm, she's now moving and working with the Central Command. In other words, she's helping out in the Middle East, in the Sheba Dedan area. Truly remarkable. And so, as I say, we have these young lions preparing to come to the defence of Israel, prepared to work in the region, opposed by the countries of Europe in the main, and we can put the banner of the King of the North to them. That King of the North is developing, and in the South, Britain and America and Australia and India form this alliance of the King of the South, who will become more and more dominant in this area as time goes on. But all revolving around Israel. The King of the North opposed to Israel, the King of the South friends with Israel. So let's look at the King of the North more briefly. We're aware of the political motivation, the drive to unite Europe together. And in a couple of months' time, May the 1st, will be this Big Bang expansion of the EU, when the new countries of Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Poland and Czech and Slovakia and Hungary, Slovakia, and off the map, Malta and Cyprus here join, and then 2007, Romania and Bulgaria. But you can see what a big expansion and a big eastward expansion that forms. Now, this drive to unite Europe together has very much been driven both by the French and by the Germans. That's why this Franco-Germanic axis has been the motor that has pushed forward the advancement of the EU. And there's a fascinating book, I've got copies there, The Great Deception, and it's subtitled The Secret History of the European Union, who shows very extensively, with extensive references, how the French and the Germans have been working behind the scenes because they realised that this plan of a European unity was such a gigantic step that people wouldn't stomach it. They had to work behind the scenes until it became like a snowball, unstoppable. And that's the stage that we have reached now. Political union is what they're all driving towards. Fascinating book. But what he doesn't see, or these two authors don't see, but what other authors have seen, Adrian Hilton lives not very far away at Stratford-on-Avon. He's one of those political writers who can see the hand of the Vatican behind this coming together of the Europe. In other words, the false prophet has been working, banding the nations together, in order that we might get to the situation when, as the false prophet, as the harlot woman, she will be riding that European beast. We haven't got there yet, but we are fast approaching it. And the role model that is taken is that of Charlemagne, born a long time ago, 1742, crowned by the Pope as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Christmas AD 800, and died at Aachen in 814. But here's the role model, Charlemagne and his empire. And this I pulled down from a website. The recreation of the empire of Charlemagne has been the overt ambition of many European Catholics, the successors of the Austria-Hungary Empire, prominent among them the MEP von Habsburg, and of course the Vatican, which saw in the historical uniting of French and German, the Frankish Europe in 800, as the historical basis for the new supranational empire of the European Union. And that's why Charlemagne is the role model. It united France and Germany. It created a greater Europe. And that's the model they're working on. Again, don't worry at the detail because you won't be able to read it from the back, but this is the extent of Charlemagne's empire when he died in 1814. So right over into Poland, well down into the bottom of Italy. Just mentally build that map into your mind because we're going to put it into a modern context. But that was Charlemagne's empire. And every year for the past 20, 30 years, the citizens of Aachen, where Charlemagne had his throne, where he died, award a medal to the person who has helped promote this dream of a political united Europe. We remember 2002 they made an exception and they awarded it to the euro because that was indeed a great step in uniting Europe together. One currency unites people in a very concrete way. And so the Charlemagne Prize was awarded to the euro in 2002. Last year it was awarded to Giscard d'Estaing, who was the president who was in charge of drawing up the constitution for Europe. And we'll touch on that in a moment, but again that was a big political step forward and he was rewarded with that. This year in May it will go to the Pat Cox, who's MEP for Irish Republic, a good Roman Catholic, and is the president of the European Parliament for all his efforts that is put into making Europe what it is. But again, an exception has been made this year. In addition to this Charlemagne Prize, a special one is being awarded. And it's being awarded to Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul will be awarded on March the 25th an extraordinary Charlemagne Prize in recognition for his service to European unity. The prize announcement noted that the pontiff was being recognised for his personal involvement and that of the Holy See in favour of the unity among the European people based on values rooted in a shared human nature and promoted effectively by Christianity. And the Pope has been campaigning, we've dealt with it in Milestones, I'm not going to deal with it here, but has been promoting the unity of Europe, been supporting those new applicant countries, encouraging them to come in because in the main they are Roman Catholic. When we come to May the 1st, Europe will be very strongly dominated by Roman Catholic countries. And as well as that, he has been campaigning for the Constitution to recognise its Christian roots. Now, in the draft that was rejected, it didn't have that. It'd be interesting to see when, if they do accept it, and there are modifications being made, whether his wishes are granted. But to show the Vatican's desire for these things, to show the political hand of the Vatican that this isn't just a religious organisation, the Pope has demonstrated this in the fact that he has pushed the founding fathers, Gaspari and Schumann and Adenauer, on the fast track to sainthood. In fact, if I find my notes, which are somewhere there, but last night I drew off the internet that Schumann is very well advanced. He's doing very well because you have to have various miracles and various things, and he is proceeding along faster than the others. But it's all a lie and a falsehood. But you see, in the people's eyes, this puts a respectability upon what the Europe that they dreamt of, a political union, and the Pope is rubber stamping it. And also, the last of the Holy Roman emperors, as it were, Karl I or Charles I, he too is scheduled for beatification shortly. So again, this stamp of approval. Now, the Constitution of Europe, the cartoonist so aptly depicts what is happening here. Giscard d'Estaing unrolling it in spite of opposition, and again we haven't time to deal with it, but dealt with it in Milestones. The British representative blew the whistle really on what was happening, how it was being pushed through, favouring the founding 6 members of the EU, and opposition, as the cartoonist is showing, is just being driven away. Now, when it came to December, it wasn't accepted, and Spain and Poland were the main ones that caused it not to be, and I do wonder whether this was part of their protest, a chance to get it altered because it hadn't taken note of its Christian roots, but that's by the by. What I want to draw out is what happened the night before, that Saturday, when it all fell flat. On Friday night, as the failure of the constitutional talks became obvious, Chirac, Schroeder, and whatever his name is, the Belgian Prime Minister, they had dinner together. They drafted a declaration of an inner core group. They canvassed support from other countries and won support from Luxembourg, Greece and the Czech Republic and Hungary, but decided not to publish it yet, not wanting to add to the crisis. So they could see they weren't going to get their way, so what they were planning was a 2-speed Europe, and this has been talked about for a long time. This is what France and Germany, if they can't get their way with their bigger plan, well, at least they want political union among the original core members of the 6 and any those that want to join them. An inner core that move ahead with political union, and an outer core with countries like Britain dragging on the outside. Now, that is in the outline there, that is the empire of Charlemagne at his death. Now, who was invited to the meal? The Czech Republic and the Hungarians. And so with the original 6, these here are the original 6 members, so with these very interested in it, and talks are in the process to bring Croatia and Bosnia into the alliance, we can see the recreation of the old beast system in these latter days in a remarkable, remarkable way. And so we have a beast, we have a false prophet, and we have a dragon system. But what we are moving towards, when we get to Revelation chapter 17, the picture alters. And we don't read of a false prophet and a beast, but we read of the harlot riding the beast. In other words, that false prophet has grown and grown and grown in power until it is holding the stirrups and pulling the reins, as it were, of the European beast. And we're seeing that unfold if we read in the right places. The growing influence of the papacy, and no doubt it will be a younger, newer pope that will come upon the scene, that will push these things with tremendous speed. But how wonderfully we see the fulfilment of the prophetic word. Now that's Europe. Unfortunately, I can't read the clock from here, so let's carry on. Russia enlarging. What Russia is doing is exactly the same thing as the EU. It is expanding. And together with Belarus and Kazakhstan and the Ukraine, they are forming a union which was described by the Russian journal as a European Union minus unified currency. In other words, they haven't got the euro, but the same kind of thing. And in fact, yesterday, the prime ministers of those 4 countries were meeting together to push forward all these plans. So Russia and Kazakhstan and the Ukraine and Belarus joining together into a confederacy. Now, in addition to that, we've seen Europe expanding eastward. We see Russia, as it were, expanding westward. But we also see the 2 power blocks, the beast and the dragon, or Russia and the EU, coming together. And again, I'll be brief because we dealt with it before, it's in Milestones. At their summit, last summit they held in November, this was a kind of statement they put out that we agreed to reinforce the strategic partnership between the EU and Russia on the basis of common values with the aim of consolidating stability, security and prosperity in the European continent. A shared vision of the united European continent. Russia and Europe without dividing lines. And so they're coming together. The driving force at the moment is to counter the effect of America's aggression in their eyes. In other words, they're wanting a king of the north to counter the growing influence of the king of the south. I just skipped, time is going. But you see remarkably how Russia going that way, Europe coming this way. These other lines here, this was the boundary between East and West in the time of the French Revolution, 1789. This was the boundary up to the First World War. And you see, between them, the new line is running. So we have a dragon power. It's not all one. We have a dragon and we have a beast. But they work together. And that we see before our eyes. Now, just very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time, are there any prophetic links to what happened in Iraq? And again, I have to say, well, go to Milestones, read about it. A wonderful prophecy of Balaam. We haven't time to look it up, but we just pull out the 2 relevant verses that I want. I'm sure one this morning talked about Amalek, the great enemy of Israel. Amalek has disappeared, seems to be a type of the enemies of Israel. He sees that Amalek, his latter end shall be that he perish forever, and that time he saw as a time, alas, who shall live when God doeth this? Ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and shall afflict Asher, and shall afflict Eber. He also shall perish forever. So here is Balaam, 3,000 years ago, speaking of our time, in a time of ships coming, of Kittim, which we associate with Cyprus and perhaps across with Crete. Asher is Assyria, is Iraq, where Britain and America are at the moment. Eber was the great-great-great-great-grandfather of Abraham. We get Hebrew, the word Hebrew, from Eber. We associate with Israel and the Semitic people. So, coming together in this one verse are ships, Kittim, Asher, and Eber. Now, if we put that alongside Daniel chapter 11, more well known to us, that 40th verse, King of the north and the king of the south. The king of the south shall push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, many horsemen, with many ships. Enter into the country, shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter into the glorious land. Many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape. Now, if we just look on a map, and this was taken, there was some pollution in the Black Sea, that's why it's a different colour. But the ships of Russia have to come down. They're up in the Crimea, and that is the area where they are. They'll have to come down through the Dardanelles, and that's why we look to the taking of Turkey. Constantinople will be all part of this movement downwards when Europe and Russia come down into the land. And it seems that those ships come and they go against Kittim or Cyprus. Now that's where Britain has her bases, and the ships of Tarshish are to be broken, we're told. Is this the occasion? Yes, I think it will be, when the ships of Tarshish will be broken. But it also talks about the Asher being afflicted. Is that because Britain and America are in that region? That's King of the North territory. They will be driven out of it. They will also, we know, go into Israel and into Egypt. And a general coming of the King of the North to take up the territory of the King of the North when Russia and Europe combine, come down into the Middle East. And the thing that Balaam saw was associated with Asher, where Britain is at the moment, and America, Kittim, where Britain is at the moment, and Israel. Remarkable prophecy. Now, we have always seen, and I still go along with this pushing by the king of the south of the king of the north, pushing the Turk out of the region in the First World War. A very important step that was, and pushing Turkey back to where she is now. It allowed Israel and all these countries to come into being. But we may well see that what has been happening at the moment is another pushing by the king of the south into the king of the north territory. And a young man who came to our meeting 3 weeks ago, who had some friends in the forces there, said that they had been told to learn Russian because they were expecting the Russians to be coming down within 3 years. How remarkable, because that's exactly what we're looking for. So the king of the south has pushed into the king of the north's territory. It's part of the arousing of the king of the north, because what Britain and America are doing are on the behalf of Israel. And it will be against Israel and the things of Israel that draws down the king of the north. So here we end. And some words of blessing and some words of warning. We live in exciting times, but those exciting times are meant to make us aware of the dangers in which we're living. And in our last talk, we saw those great dangers. Brother Ken brought them before us. So there is a blessing on those who do God's commandments. There is a way to the tree of life. There is everlasting life. There is a wonderful hope set before us if we will walk in the right way. But we have to be aware of the kind of lives that we are living. That anything that defileth or worketh abomination or maketh a lie, they will be excluded. Only those written and keeping their names unblotted out of the Lamb's book of life will enter in. And there is this wonderful, wonderful hope. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. That's the hope that has been set before us, brothers and sisters and young people. A new day is dawning, and God is going to bring about a new heavens and a new earth when the terrible things of this world will disappear. They won't come into mind or won't be remembered. But we are glad. We do rejoice that we have this understanding and this hope. Jerusalem is to be trodden down yet once more of the Gentiles, but her Saviour is at hand. And in the mercy of God we will be with that Saviour, with our Lord Jesus, to save Israel from their enemies, to drive back the false system of worship, and to establish peace and joy. So as Prophet Isaiah said, weeping and mourning will be heard no more. And the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign for ever and ever.